Hello, and thank you for joining us today for yet another great episode of The Truth and Lies. My name is Eddie Yusuf. I am your host, but not only the host, I am a speaker as well. And on today's topic, we'll be discussing the danger of political Islam. Was it a religious move? Was it a political move? Or is it both? So we'll have to discuss that on this show. And also with us via Skype, we have Dr. Bill Warner and Brother Rami Dabbas. Now, Bill Warner will be staying with us for approximately an hour. Then he will have to take off. Then we'll have to continue the show with Rami Dabbas. So thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. And we are live via Facebook. Our satellites are live as well in the Middle East. And we'll be on YouTube pretty soon. So please like, share, everywhere that you can. Spread the word out. Our phone lines will be opened in approximately 30 minutes. And the phone number is 248-416-1300. Now, I don't know much about political Islam. I do know about Islam. Dr. Bill Warner is an expert on political Islam. So he's going to teach us a little bit more about it and what it has to say in the political aspect of things. Dr. Bill Warner, are you there?
I'm here, ready, willing, and waiting.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do?
Well, I currently, we'll start where I'm now and work backwards. I currently run a book publishing company which devotes itself to the publishing of my works on political Islam. So that's what I do now. I do interviews, do newsletters, videos, and that kind of thing. I started out, however, in my education as a scientist and an engineer. So my approach to things are very analytic. I'm very much a believer of fact-based reasoning. When I first started studying Islam, I was a young man of 30, I'm now 78, and I studied Sufism, mystical Islam. But I soon became unenchanted with that because Sufism struck me as being a marble palace, but there were some dark corners in it that no one wanted to shine a light in. I didn't know what those corners were, but I now know they were Sharia and Jihad. So then I had, as a professor, I had many students who were Muslims, and I believe that if you're going to understand someone, it's good to understand their religion. So this time I read the Quran cover to cover, and then I read the life of Muhammad. And then I said, ooh, we have a problem. So then on 9/11, September 11, 2001, when I saw the second plane hit the second tower, I said, it is jihad. Islam is here. In that moment, I decided I would dedicate the rest of my life to explaining to people the political nature of Islam, not the religious nature, but its political nature. Okay. So that's briefly how I got to where I am now.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on our show, and we thank you for being here. Also with us via Skype is Brother Rami Dabbas. I believe Rami Dabbas is a writer for an Israelite magazine, if I could say that. Hi, Brother Rami, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's an honor and pleasure to be on your show. An honor to be a guest with Dr. Bill Warner in the same episode. It's not the first time, of course, I joined the Trinity channel. I joined many times, whether in Arabic or in English language. It's a real honor again to be with Dr. Bill Warner. I'm a lot enthusiastic to join this show because of Dr. Bill, of course, to join with him in the same show. It's a real honor.
Thank you so much. You're quite kind.
Dr. Bill, it seems like you have a fan on our show, which is great. I'm also your fan as well, so this is nice. Now, Dr. Bill, I've seen some of your videos that are online. They're on YouTube as well. Some of them are on Facebook, which I admired and I liked. But here's what I saw, that with every religion that we talk about, and with every religion that is out there, none of it is so obsessed with the kafirs, and kafirs meaning they are the infidels. Really, when you look at the Torah, when you look at the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, when you look at all of these different sections in different religions, you see that they're really trying to teach their people how to live, how to behave better. But the Quran seems like it is very honing in or zooming in on the kafirs, on the infidels, and what you ought to do with it. Not only in the Quran, but in the Hadith, in the Sirat as well. And it seems like this is, it was crazy to me when I first heard this idea. So I went and read it for myself, and I saw that that actually is the truth, that Islam is considered to be the most hostile religion towards the Kafirs. Now, is that a religious movement or is that a political movement? What do you say, Dr. Bill?
Yes. When I first started reading the Quran and other such books, the Hadith and the Sirah, I was impressed with the fact that most of it was about me and people like me. For instance, I've studied a lot about Buddhism. If you read the Buddhist sutras, they're about how to be a Buddhist. If you read the Torah, it's about how to be a Jew. But Islam was fixated on those outside of Islam. And so that's when I said, this is very strange. Now, I introduced you to the fact earlier that I'm a scientist, and scientists love to measure and count. So I sat down and I counted up all the words devoted to the Kafir in the Sirah, the life of Muhammad, the Hadith, I used Bukhari, and then the Quran. 51% of the total text of Islam is about you and me. Only 49% is about religion, and I call religion the 5 pillars. It's what you do to go to heaven and avoid hell. So Islam is fixated on the people outside of Islam, which struck me as very peculiar and very disheartening, because I don't mind people being interested in me, but the Quran shows not just an interest in me, but calls me names like I'm a filthy kafir, I'm lower than an animal. And then we see what Muhammad did to kafirs, and it was not good. And so that's how I came about to this idea that it was political Islam was the most important, because it deals with the non-Muslim. Because I'm not involved in the religion of Islam, and yet I'm very involved with Islam, political Islam.
Okay. Well, thank you for that really informative kind of excerpt. All right, so this is what I was wondering. You were talking about 9/11 that you just mentioned on September 11th and the Twin Towers going down. It seems like this is not a date that these terrorists have picked out of a hat and decided to go with it. I remember history quite well, especially when it comes to this. When Islam was the majority in the world at around 1600s, they were prosperous, and they went to battle against this last place that they needed to take hold of. And if they would have taken hold of this last place at the gates of Vienna, it is my assumption that Islam would have ruled the world. But at the gates of Vienna, they were stopped. In particularly the date, September 11th of 1683. Now, it seems this is when the Europeans pushed back. Now, it seems like they didn't just pick this date out of a hat. That's why they picked the date 9/11. And it seems like that this was revenge held on tightly for all these years and passed down to their children and their children's children. And they took revenge and they call it war. Now, let's just say if I was to insult a Muslim today, and I'll say, hey, it's all your fault that this happened, even though that peaceful Muslim had nothing to do with it. Now, when the Muslim tells me, and if I decided to insult their prophet or the Quran, and the Muslim tells me, no, you cannot do that. Is that religious or is that a political move? And how do we, as just regular civilians, know this without even studying the Quran? How do we know the difference between the political move and the religious move, Dr. Bill?
I use a simple rule of thumb. If it involves the kafir, it's political. Now, this can be subtle, this difference between religion and politics. Let me give you an example. You'd say prayer. Well, prayer is purely religious, isn't it? But let's examine closely what's happening in America today, and we see it in Europe. Muslims commandeer the street to have prayer outside. Now then, you say, but it's religious. No. The prayer is religious. Commandeering the street is a political action. Eddie, if you and I go out here into the streets of Nashville and start stopping traffic, we will be arrested, because you're not allowed, the laws of the land do not allow you to block traffic. So the prayer outside where they commandeer the street is a political motivated action, that it is to assert Islam's power. We will stop the traffic when we want to.
That's right, yeah. I've seen that over here in Europe, they're taking over, especially with Sharia law. They're taking over, been taking over the East, specifically the Middle East. But let's go to Brother Rami. So Rami, in your opinion, what is political Islam and how does it differ from religious Islam? Because I just asked that to Dr. Bill. Let's get your views on that as well.
Political Islam backs to Muhammad. So it's not something new like the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafist movement or Al-Qaeda. Muhammad, when he occupied Medina from Mecca, He was first Islamic politician, the first military leader from Islam. Of course, Muhammad was a warmonger in the same time. The Muslims worship Muhammad like they worship their God, Allah. And the first jihadist was who promoted jihad and terrorism was Muhammad, of course, in the modern world. After Muhammad's death in 632, his successors led the Islamic community, were known as caliphs. The first three caliphs were the Umayyad, the Abbasid, and between the 8th century and the 10th century. The Abbasid Caliphate occupation were from North Africa to the west to Central Asia in the east. The occupation involved killing of non-Muslims, paying jizya, slavery to blacks, slavery to women, Islamization of these countries. As we can see in this time, most of these countries, most are Islamic. That's a brief introduction. Of course, I can't go more because the Turkish Ottoman caliphates were occupied half of Europe and enslaved its people. So I believe it's a political more than religious. If it were only religious, we will live in peace. But I think it's a political, it's an ideology, Islam, involving the terrorism, jihad, enslaving, killing, that's it.
Yeah, so that's a lot said. There is the political movement of Islam, and then there's the religious movement. But Bill, before we even go any further, at what point, since you've studied this a lot in extensive ways, at what point did it really become political, or did it always start with a political sense, or was it religious? At what point, if you can give us that real quick?
Well, let's answer the question by going to Muhammad. When we read the Sirah, Muhammad preached the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca and converted about 150 Arabs to Islam. So that's about 10 a year. Hardly success. The Meccans, and by the way, in Mecca, there were some fist fights, but there was no killing. There is no jihad found in the Quran of Mecca. Now, there are two Qurans. There's early Quran in Mecca, which is religious, and the latter Quran in Medina, which is very political. But here's the deal. And when Muhammad went to Medina, he became a politician and a jihadist, a warlord. When he died, every Arab on the peninsula was now a Muslim. So we look at it. So which was effective? The religion of Islam? Not really. The politics of Islam, which gave them power. It's the political Islam, which is the backbone of Islam. And if Islam did not have this political nature, that is, if Islam were only the Quran of Mecca with no jihad in it, I wouldn't be here talking to you.
That's right. Yeah, we wouldn't be here talking if it wasn't for that. So thank you for that. Brother Rami, let's ask you another question here. Who's the founder of political Islam today in the modern world, in your opinion?
Of course, Hassan al-Banna is the founder of the political Islam in the modern world, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is the mother lode of the global terrorism. We are unlikely to be successful defeating Islamic terrorism without confronting the head of the snake. Is the umbrella organization from which all terrorism flows, because the Brotherhood's goal is the global Islamic rule. It's no coincidence that every terrorist stems from the same Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, I consider it this movement as a terrorist organization which need to be declared as terrorist worldwide. Each single terrorist from Al-Qaeda, from ISIS, from Al-Shabaab movement, from each terrorist organization was a member in the Muslim Brotherhood. Let me tell you a few reasons. I have more than 15 reasons to say about the Muslim Brotherhood, why it should be declared as a terrorist organization. I will say 5, 6, 7, and you can go on. Firstly, the motto and the logo of the Muslim Brotherhood speaks for themselves. The motto is Allah is our objective, Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, dying for Allah is our highest hope. That's a first reason. Second reason, the Muslim Brotherhood founded in Egypt in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, who sought to revive the crumble of Islamic empire, to make a caliphate, same as the ISIS, the Islamic State Caliphate, Al-Qaeda Caliphate. So it's the same basically. In a book titled The Way of Jihad by Banna wrote, jihad means the fighting of unbelievers. I'm already by Sharia law an apostate of Islam. I should be killed by the Islamic law. and by the law of Islam, you are both unbelievers. So basically, that's an Islamic law, and that's what the Brotherhood believes. Brotherhood ideologue Sayyid Qutb, known as the father of modern jihad, traveled to the United States before he was executed by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser in 1966. Qutb saw the world divided into two spheres, in two parties, party of Allah, the believers, and party of Satan as the unbelievers. Top brains of Al-Qaeda leadership, as I said, Osama bin Laden and other leaders, even al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, was a Muslim Brotherhood member. American-born Imam Anwar Awlaki issued a fatwa against the United States during time he was sheltered by fellow Brotherhood members in Yemen, and he famously declared, "I pray that Allah destroys America." Sixth reason, and I think I will make it the last reason because I have, as I said, more than 15, but I think we it will have a lot of time to say each reasons. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, known as Islamist, who is steering Turkey back to Sharia law, has a close relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, who has endorsed him as the new leader of the global Islamic community.
That's right. And for a lot of Muslims, when they take a look at the Muslim Brotherhood, some of them are actually, especially those that were in Cairo and in Egypt, overthrew the leader. And they tried to play it to where it was a coup, and they were just self-defense, acting in self-defense, but it really wasn't the case if we know our history. But anyways, I want to remind our callers that we are live. The phone lines are now open for you to call. The phone number is 248-416-1300. Now, to Dr. Bill, how is political Islam, as you know it, and the Muslim Brotherhood that Rami just talked about, how are they related and make sense to us in the West here? Because we're familiar with how they're related in the East. But in the West, how are they related?
In America, the Muslim Brotherhood is far more dangerous to our civilization than Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, because basically Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and others practice jihad of the sword. Well, I'm not so concerned with jihad of the sword. I'm very much concerned with jihad of speech, jihad of writing, and jihad of money. And this is where the Muslim Brotherhood is extraordinary. The Muslim Brotherhood has an ability to penetrate a society at the very top, not at the grassroots. Well, it can do that as well, but it always deals with people at the top. It is unmatched in their ability to do strategic thinking. The Muslim Brotherhood does planning that's 10 years out, 20 years out, and a generation and a century out. No one is more powerful at strategic reasoning than the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Muslim Brotherhood is, I'm far more afraid of than any of the other organizations, such as Al-Qaeda or Islamic State.
Right. Okay. So Rami just mentioned something about Satan, and it is, in my opinion, from my studies, that Muhammad, and Muslims, no offense when you guys hear this, Muhammad was controlled by Satan, and I'll show you exactly where it's at. And the reason why I'm saying no offense, I want you guys to understand, if you're a Muslim and you're watching, we're going to say things that might offend you. We're saying no offense, but we're going to say things that might offend you, and that's okay. That's our culture. That's the way we do it. And not only that, we're not saying it to offend you. We're not saying it to bash the Quran. We're not saying it to make fun of you. We're just saying it because we've done our studies, and majority of Muslims in the West really haven't studied the Quran at all. I'll find about 5 to 10% of a lot of Muslims that I've talked to barely know their Quran, barely know their Hadith. So I want to go together, if we could, in the Quran, chapter 15, verse 42. It says, "From my slaves," this is Allah talking, that is the Muslims, "over them you, shaitan," so God is talking to Satan, "have no authority except the lost ones who follow you, Satan." All right, so we understand that God is talking to the Muslims, and he's saying, from my slaves, you guys are my slaves, Muslims, over you, Satan does not have any authority, except for the ones who follow Satan. All right, so I understand that so far. In the Quran, chapter 22, verse 52, which is one of my favorite chapters and verse, "And we did not send before you any messenger or prophet, except that he spoke. Satan threw into it," and especially in the Arabic, Satan threw into it here is the Quran, but Allah abolishes that which Satan throws in, then Allah makes precise His verses, and Allah is knowing and wise. So here God is saying, we didn't send any prophet before, you're the first one, that Satan was allowed to throw in it. That means it is actually the Quran, right? So throw into it, so Satan was able to throw into the Quran satanic verses, which we're familiar with in chapter 53, verses 19 through 20. We'll find the satanic verses of Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because there's an interesting tafsir, which is a commentary, an Islamic commentary about this. So in this commentary, and it's Tafsir al-Jalalain, which is a scholar, and it's accepted by a lot of Muslims, according to chapter 53, verses 19 and 20, this is what he says, that the devil put on his tongue that which he has secretly wished and hoped for. So whatever the devil had wished and hoped for, he put on the tongue of Muhammad, and Muhammad included it in the Quran as well. And I have plenty of hadiths to show you, which I'm going to go through one more hadith to show you that the Quran was successful in putting these things on his tongue. So really, if he was led by Allah, then Allah is here Satan, and I'll prove some more in this. In Sahih Muslim 28:14, Part A, this is exactly what it says. There is none amongst you with whom is not an attachment from amongst the devils or the jinns. They, the companions, said, Allah's Messenger, how about with you? Is there one with you too? Thereupon he said, yes. So he has a Satan that's attached with him. But Allah helps me against him. So Allah helps him against Satan. I'm surprised because Allah says be, and there it is. But not in this case. Allah's helping him against it. So I am saved from his hand, and he does not command me but for good. So Satan commands Muhammad to do good. Satan commands Muhammad, that's point number one. Point number two, how is Satan commanding to do good? Satan knows no good. Nothing good at all comes out of Satan. But here, in this passage, and in this Sahih Muslim, 28:14, the first part, part A, it says that Satan commands me nothing but for good. So it seems like that Satan is commanded Muhammad, and Muhammad is going out with the sword. Not at first, because he was the minority, but then when he gained a lot of people as followers, then he started to go out with a sword. And even, Dr. Bill, you could speak about this a little bit. When the Muslims decided to leave Islam right at his death, Abu Bakr went out with a sword and tried to convert them back, and he was successful at converting them back. So that doesn't sound like a religious move to me. A religious move would be, I come to you, Dr. Bill, and I try to convince you to come back by, word of thought, by understanding, by trying to be clever, or by knowing my religion and by knowing your religion, and try to convert you back just by speech. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. It seems like it's with the sword or else. Am I right on that?
Let's take another example. Let's refer to Abu Bakr, the first caliph. He could be called Muhammad's closest companion. He was his father-in-law, the father of Aisha. And what did Abu Bakr say when Muslims tried to leave Islam? Well, I'll pronounce this incorrectly in Arabic, but they had the Ridda Wars, which is the apostasy wars. Again, Eddie, you've made the exact correct point. Abu Bakr did not sit down with these leaders and say, come, let us reason together. We've told you this, you know the truth of that, and so therefore it implies this. Let us be reasonable men and work together. No, he pulled out the sword, and after he killed enough Muslims, the ones who were left said, we've given some reconsideration to this business of Islam and Muhammad, and we're good with it now.
But it seems like that's the same step that Muslims are taking today all over the East, and is trying to apply it here in the West as well. I remember the cartoon, well, you know what, I don't even want to get into the cartoon drawing and what happened on that topic. Let's give Rami a chance as well. Now, Rami, here, I have a question for you that I had typed up, and I thought it was interesting to ask, especially you've lived it. You've lived under Sharia law, so and I've lived under Sharia law, and we are experts, I would say, under the actual physical law or the law that takes place that we have to live under. Dr. Bill has not lived under, but he's an expert on it, and he studied it, and he's devoted, I believe, 40 plus years to it. But here's my question to you, which I'll go back to Dr. Bill with it as well. What are the roots of Islamic terrorism, and does Islamic terrorism have anything to do, today's Islamic terrorism, have anything to do with that Islamic terrorism of Muhammad's time?
Well, the history of Islam is full of massacres, torture, and murder, even amongst the first followers of Islam themselves, Muhammad, contrary to what Muslims claim. In Islam, it's known that Muhammad ordered the assassination of all anti-Quran poets and those who stood against him. Political Islam groups, including the Muslim Brotherhood, initiates political assassination, as Muhammad himself had done against his opponents. The earliest history of Islam is full of political assassination, but after Muhammad's immigration to Medina and his success in persuading its tribes to accept Islam, he formed a military base and set out from there conquering the Arabic tribes and converting them to Islam, subjecting them to Islam with a sword, giving them a choice, Islam or jizya or war. And his followers were tempted by the women and looted money from the killings of non-Muslims. In this way, Muhammad conquered most of the Arabian Peninsula. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Boko Haram, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Salafis, and the Jihadis, and Somali Shabab movement all read Muhammad's biography well and know the role of invasion and armed forces in subjecting others to their beliefs. All their terrorist acts are based on Muhammad's biography and verses of Quran. The attempts to beautify Islam by characterizing terrorist groups as hardline takfiri and the claims that Islam is moderate and tolerant religion that argues science and development are funny. Even the Muslim Brotherhood, as I said, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the president or the Turkish president, who is now considered by the Muslim Brotherhood as the caliph, said there is no modern Islam. It's Islam is Islam. The nature of Islam is radical. Consider what Muhammad says in his violent verses in Quran. Any honest reader of the history of Muhammad sees two-faced person. Muhammad in Mecca when he was a minority, saying the Muslim Brotherhood in America, they are peaceful, they are for civil rights, they are for human rights, and that's what he claimed when he was a minority. But when he became a majority and powerful, he invaded and used the force and power, conquering these cities, these areas by practicing taqiyya. And on the other hand, Muhammad in Medina, as I said, when he was majority, murdered and slaughtered, cut off heads, issued Quran verses of murder and persecution of non-Muslims. That's what I say. In the modern world, the first emergences of political Islam began in 1928 when the Muslim Brotherhood, among the objective of this group was a seek of the Arab mind and spreading radicalism, promoting terrorism, spreading myths, suppressing the freedom of opinion and expression, and assassinating writers and thinkers. Muslim Brotherhood claims Islam is the solution and Sharia law, that's what they believe.
That's right, that's right. Let me give you guys some examples of what Rami just said. If I was to criticize Islam, I ought to be dead, I ought to be slain, I ought to be beheaded. And that's part of Sharia law, by the way. So if I was today in the West to criticize Islam, that's not going to happen because Sharia law doesn't apply here. But if I was in the East, that would happen. Well, where am I getting this from? It's because of what Muhammad had done and his followers had done as well. So for an example, in Sunan an-Nisa, which is a Sahih hadith, Sunan an-Nisa 3966. You guys could look this up as well. The Prophet said, I have been commanded to fight. Here the word in Arabic is not fight, but to murder, to kill. I have been commanded to murder, to kill the idolaters until they bear witness, La ilaha illallah, that means there's no God but God, and that Muhammad, his slave and messenger. So this is what I must say in order for me to save my life, that there is no God and there's no God but God, and Muhammad is his last messenger. is his prophet. And so we see shirk there, and Muslims would like to accuse us of the biggest sin in Islam, which is shirk, which is associating someone with God. And here we see a blatant association with God. And it continues, if they bear witness, so there's an exception, there's a clause. If they bear witness that La ilaha illallah and that Muhammad is his slave and messenger, and they must follow step number 2. They must pray and face the Qibla, face where Mecca is. And the Qibla has been changed, by the way, the direction has been changed. But it changed later on, and now we're seeing that the mosque or the Kaaba wasn't really built where it was today, but we'll talk about that on a later episode. So step number 1, they must say La ilaha illallah and Muhammad is his messenger, Muhammad is the prophet of God. They must pray and face the Qibla, they must face the Kaaba, and they must eat our animals, our slaughtered animals. So halal, kosher, basically for the Jew, but halal for the Muslim. So we must do all of that. Then their blood and wealth becomes forbidden to us except what the right hand is due, or what right is due. So what is due to the kafir? Here's the kafir who is, Muhammad is going out against them in fight, in battle to kill, and he gives them an option. Either you say these things and you pray towards the Kaaba, and then you eat our slaughtered food the way we slaughtered it, that is halal food, or we off with your heads we go. And that's the way what Muslims are doing, such as the terrorists. They're following the way of Muhammad. So when we look at today's Muslims here in the West, or even the nominal, just the nominal Muslims, right? They're just Muslims by name. I would say that these are not real Muslims, but the real Muslims are the ones who are going out with a sword. They're practicing the sword and the terrorists because they're going after, they're following exactly what Muhammad and his followers had done in his century, in 6th, 7th century. How about if I slander the Prophet? If I slander the Prophet, what should happen to me? Now, this is Sunan al-Nisa 4070, 4070. Sunan al-Nisa 4070. There was this older blind man who had this slave girl named Walad. And here, this lady that he used to speak to, he said about her, so she has 2 kids from him, by the way. All right, he said about her, she was kind. She was gentle towards me. And I have 2 sons, like pearls from her. So even the sons are beautiful. They obey their mom. They obey their dad. But she used to slander and defame the Prophet a great deal. Now, and that's what happened. So what this blind man did is he took a dagger and he stabbed it into her stomach or in her heart, and he stayed on top of it till she was actually dead. And he left her there till morning. When morning came, the news reached Muhammad. Muhammad called him out and said, "What have you done? Why did you do this?" And he was very afraid, so he told him what happened. And he mentioned to the Prophet again, I mentioned your name and she slandered it. So I got a dagger, which I thrust into her stomach and leaned on it until I killed her. The messenger of God here, all right, here's the final messenger of God. He didn't say, how do we know that this is true? You will all by yourself. Are there any witnesses? He didn't say what you did wasn't right. Why don't you bring her to me? Let's see why she's slandering me. Let me talk to her. He didn't say any of that. There was zero justice at all. As a matter of fact, here is what he said. The messenger of Allah said, I bear witness that her blood is permissible. So her blood is okay. It's okay that we did this, and it's okay that you did this. And what the Muslims are following, specifically the terrorists and the Muslim Brotherhood and the MSA, I mean, particularly what they're following is what Muhammad had done, and he approved of this blind man doing that. Therefore, he will approve of the terrorist action when they do that. And a lot of people use suicide bomber. I particularly hate this word suicide bomber. Don't you, Bill? Don't you hate this word suicide bomber? They're martyrs. You're going out to kill for the sake of your prophet and for the sake of your religion. You're a martyr. If somebody kills me for the sake of Jesus, I'm a martyr. I'm not a suicide bomber. I'm not a suicide killer. What did I do? Go ahead and talk about that for a little, Bill, Dr. Bill.
Well, I, for instance, think we need to use precise terms, and I reject the use of terrorism because it is driven by the jihad doctrine. So therefore, these people I call them jihadists. I don't call them terrorists because I can be a terrorist. I can leave what I'm doing right now, go pour gasoline on a house and burn the people inside it. I can create terror. But what's important when you use the word jihad is you distinguish this particular kind of jihad, terror. It has a specific doctrinal nature. You just told us one of the reasons that a Muslim can do what he does. If I slander Muhammad or say something they don't like, according to the Sunnah of Muhammad, he can imitate it and I can be killed. So therefore, we need to stay with precise use of terms. And I say that these people are jihadists, not terrorists. And the jihad doctrine is there. By the way, let me point out something. Some people who may be watching this show may think, well, there's just a verse or two about jihad. Wrong. There are two Qurans. The Quran written in Medina, 28% of the Quran written in Medina is about jihad. That is not some simple verse. It's not just this is a systemic doctrine. It's not just an individual thing here or there. Muhammad made his success with jihad, and so therefore we ought to call it what it is. It is jihad, and those who practice it are jihadists. Or if you prefer, jihadis.
Right. And jihad, the Muslims will say, just means struggle. And I don't see it as a spiritual struggle at all. Jihad has always taken place in the physical form, especially coming from a person that's lived in the East, and Brother Rami has lived in the East as well. We don't see jihad as a spiritual kind of a way. But Dr. Bill, jihad, is it a part of political Islam, in your opinion, or is it completely separate and it's only associated with the religious part of Islam?
Well, let's use the term jihad and understand what it means. It means struggle, effort, work. So I've mentioned earlier, there are different kinds of jihad. There's jihad of the sword, jihad of speech, jihad of writing, and jihad of money. Let's not neglect jihad of the money, so therefore jihad is a systemic doctrine. But again, I come back to this fact we need to use precise terms, and so therefore I use the term jihad a lot because it's the term used in Islam. So, by the way, the three of us gathered here tonight discussing this issue, we'll notice we all agree. I mean, Brother Rami knows what he's talking about, as do you, Eddie. Here's my question to both of you. This is written out so clearly. This is not some, well, kind of, maybe, if. No. It could not be more clear. Why are we so few, those who will actually turn to the facts of Islam to discuss Islam? Because the people that I know here in America, they want to talk about the nice Muslim they met at work, or they met this nice woman who is a Muslim. So what they want to do is to say, I know nice Muslims, but what we say is, no, we want to know Muhammad, we want to know Allah. And it's easy to do. You know, one of the things we have here today that people need to recognize is that for years, centuries even, to study Islamic doctrine, you need to be a serious scholar, but no more. There are books now, I sell books as thin as 80 pages to discuss one feature of Islam. So we live in a time in history in which for the first time Islam is easy to understand. What our purpose here tonight is to invite people to the easy understanding of Islam, draw your own conclusions based on the facts of the matter. I mean, what Brother Eddie just read were the facts of the matter. He's reading a hadith. So therefore, why are we so rare and odd? It's easy to do. My main purpose in life is to do what we're doing tonight, which is to educate people about the fact that there are facts of Islam. It's not just what you think. It's not how you feel. The facts of Islam are there. Read them and judge for yourself.
Right, because the Muslim today living in the West, or even in this century, does not define Islam. Actually, what defines Islam is Muhammad and his Khalifas, or who came after him, and the people that practice it during their day. Now, Rami, I think that you have stated before that you lived in Jordan, or do you currently live in Jordan? Is that right?
Well, currently I'm in Jordan, yes.
Okay, gotcha. So now, in Jordan, when you state these facts, obviously you might have a bullseye on your back if you were to go out and speak about it publicly. Like, you can't just grab a milk crate or stand up on a bench and start preaching that what Islam is teaching here, especially about some of these verses that I just mentioned or some of the hadiths. You can't do that. You'll have a bullseye on your back. You might die the next day. And That may be a one-way street for you and your family if you have any. So what can we do? Bill asked us a question, and it was, what do we do? Do we state the facts, or are we afraid of stating the facts because there's going to be a bullseye on our backs?
Well, I will compare Muhammad to the Nazi leader of Adolf Hitler. Most of the Germans weren't Nazis or moderate Nazis. They didn't believe in wars, like Islam. The most of Muslims are moderate Muslims considered, so they don't believe in wars. But that's a problem because Hitler, when he became in power, the most of Germans were not real Nazis. So the same when ISIS or Al Qaeda or the radical Islamic groups or the Muslim Brotherhood gets in power, most of Muslims are moderate, but now they are in power, so they will apply Sharia law in their countries. They will wage a wars against other people. They will slaughter or force Christians or non-Muslims to pay jizya. The apostates will be killed. Of course, I'm here in Jordan. I can't say this in public. Fortunately, I don't think anyone of Jordan watches me right now, so that's why I'm joining. But in street, I cannot say this, or at work, I cannot say this. If I didn't get killed, of course, I will have a fight at least with a bunch of people. But fortunately, in these shows, nobody watches me. Maybe 1, 2, 3, and they don't know if I live in Jordan or in America or in Canada or in Israel.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you for doing what you're doing. But I just want to tell the audience, right? The audience doesn't know about these things maybe from the East and what happens if you mention these things. So we want to tell them because you obviously live there, and I've lived there, and this is what happens. Again, I want to remind the callers that our phone lines are open. You can call, comment, question, object, whatever it is that you want to do. On the show, the phone number is 248-416-1300. Brother Rami just mentioned something real quick, which was to pay the jizya. In chapter 9, verse 29, if you read it in English, it will say, fight those who are disbelievers. Fight those who do not believe in Allah and the Prophet. He reads Arabic, so do I. The word there is qatilu. Qatilu means murder, means kill. You go out and you murder and you kill those who do not believe in Islam, particularly Allah and His Prophet. So, and if we did decide to convert and believe, we have to pay a penalty, which is called a jizya, which that's literally the word for penalty, jaza. We have to pay a penalty for believing what we believe in, and this is a heavier tax on us, and that money is taken from us and used for the extension of Islam. Just wanted to give a reference to where Brother Rami had pointed out to as far as talking about the jizya. Now, let's go back to Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill, how can we as Christians or churches here in the West do anything about that? Or never mind the churches and the Christians. How about atheists? How about people with morality? What can we do? What should we do? I mean, do we just sit here and talk about it with Dr. Bill and with Rami and we think that we've made a difference? Or do we go all out? Do we sign treaties? Do we try to reach our senators and our presidents or anything of that nature? What can we do?
We can do all the things you mentioned, but what I advocate is this, is that churches should bring into their church Christians from Africa, Christians from the Middle East, and to bring apostates into the church, because therefore you can see what the actual results are. I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago and I said, most of this people in this audience are Christians, but I said if you were all atheists and Jews and Buddhists, I would still say the same thing. The most persecuted minority group in the world are Christians in Islamic lands. Be you an atheist or whatever else, if you have any compassion in your heart at all, should you not care for those who are the worst treated? So, and this I fault the churches for. You mentioned earlier, I think Eddie said maybe 5% of Muslims know anything about Islamic doctrine. Well, I would say that roughly only 5% of Christians seem to care about the persecuted church. Now, those are bitter words to say on a religious station, but I'm only telling you what it's like here in Nashville, Tennessee. The churches are desperate to remain ignorant. And I think because they're desperate to remain ignorant is, as long as they can pretend they don't see anything, don't hear anything, then they can be silent. But this silence is the wrong thing. Silence in the face of evil, Eddie, is evil itself. So therefore, Christians need to be more courageous, and atheists, and Jews, and Buddhists, and talk about the persecution that happens to all religious people under Islam. So this is what I say, and I'm really sincere when I say that to bring in. The other thing I advocate that Christians should do is to talk with their leaders of religious faith, not just the members, but for instance, we have Coptic Christians here in Nashville, Tennessee. I asked a Coptic priest, I said, have you ever had a Christian minister in Nashville invite you for a cup of coffee? He says, no, I never heard of that. So this is wrong. Christians are commanded to care for the persecuted Christians. Now, the atheists aren't commanded to care, nor the Buddhists, but nevertheless, through compassion and the application of the golden rule itself, we need to tend to these people. It is tragic that they suffer, and we are silent about it. This is one of my favorite things. It's not. I talk about it a lot. It's not really favorite for me. I wish that people just did it and I didn't have to talk about it.
Right, and I think, according to Christians, according to the Bible, I believe is Jude. The book of Jude tells us that or 1 John 1, it tells us that if we see wrong and we do nothing about it, if we see sin and we do nothing about it, we're involved in that sin as well. We are just as guilty. So my call out to you, if you're watching as Christians, atheists, or whatever the case, or you're going to watch this later, if you see something that is immoral, according to God, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, the God of the New Testament, if you see something like that happening, we ought to do something about it. But we're not doing anything about it. We keep our mouth shut in the name of what? Tolerance. We ought to tolerate what we've done. And I think that a lot of, I would say Muslims, would play this part, and that is, America has bombed our country, therefore we come to this country because it's free. That's fine, I understand, because I came to this country, even though my own country was bombed by America. That's fine, I agree. I love the life here because of the freedom that I didn't have in Iraq. Now, with that said, we see a lot of Muslims that are living under Sharia law in the East, that are living under this political Islam in the East, coming here. Why are you coming here and then trying to convert this Islamic or this American society to an Islamic society? Because at the end, when you will win, if you will win by having Sharia law apply to all of the United States, then it will be just like the East. And then where will you go to if it's all governed by Sharia law and by Islam? Where will you go to? You cannot go anywhere. So my point is, why are you trying to come here as Muslims and try to convert America into an Islamic state or Islamic law, and then you were just escaped one? What is the point of that? Does it become holier? No. Obviously, it is my opinion that it is a political move, just like Dr. Bill Warner said, and Brother Rami. So Brother Rami, let's go to you. Is Islam compatible with democracy and human rights? Now, I know one thing for sure from my studies. The word human rights and Islam don't go together, because there weren't any human rights, there weren't any animal rights as well. Muhammad commanded that anything black, human, there was racism as well. It's in particularly animals. If you find a black dog, you kill it. Black horse, black this, black that, you kill it. Why? Merely because he hated blacks. But we'll get into that in a minute. That's not human rights. That's not animal rights. Talk to us a little bit more about that in length, if you could.
Let us look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and compare it to Islamic law and doctrine. First article, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 2, everyone is entitled to all rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or another whatever opinion. Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery. That's fourth articles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, Islam's law, firstly, women are inferior under Islamic law. Their testimony in court of law is worth half of that a man. Non-Muslims living in Muslim countries have inferior status under Islamic law. That's secondly. Thirdly, non-believers, atheists, surely the most neglected minority in history in Muslim countries, don't have the right to live. Fourth, slavery is recognized in Quran. Muslims are allowed to cohabit with any of their female slaves. They are allowed to take the positions of married women if they were slaves. Now back to the Declaration of the Human Rights, Article 5 of Human Rights. No one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Now, under Islam's law, we have seen that punishments are in store for the transgressors of the Islamic law: amputation, crucifixion, stoning to death, and flogging. Now, Article 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in the Declaration of Human Rights all deal with the rights of the accused person for a fair trial. But in the Islam's law, revenge for a killing is officially sanctioned through a money recompense is also possible. So the legal procedure under Islam can hardly be called impartial or fair. For any matter of witness all sort of injustice in the Islam's law. A non-Muslim may not be testify against a Muslim because, for example, a Muslim may rob a non-Muslim in his home with his impunity if there are no witnesses except the non-Muslim himself. The evidence of Muslim women is admitted only very exceptionally, and then only from twice number required of men. Now back to Article 16, which deals with the rights of marriage of men and women. While Islam's law, as we shall see in our chapter of women, women under Islam don't have equal rights under Islam. They are not free to marry who they wish. The rights of divorce are not equal. Of course, there are a lot of the other points of the Declaration of Human Rights. I can go on, but these are just an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've got a lot to say about human rights in Islam. Like I said, I don't think the two go together. But let's hang on a second. I think we have a call from Ala. Ala, are you there?
Yeah, I got one question to Eddie Yusuf. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned that the Satan commands Muhammad. That's not true. Can you mention the part where that?
Yeah, sure. Let me go right to it. Here it is. Sahih Muslim 2814, 2814, Part A. And in case you missed it, I'm just gonna go through the logic with you. In the Quran 1542, it says Satan commands no one except for the one who follows Satan, and Satan has full authority over him. That's in the Quran 1542. Yet in Sahih Muslim 2814, the first part, Part A, Satan commands Muhammad. So I'm just drawing a logic from your sources. And your sources are telling me this. I'm not using external sources, and I'm using Sahih. All right, so these are graded Sahih. So there's none amongst you with whom there's not a detachment from amongst the jinn, the devil. They, the companions of Muhammad, asked Allah's Messenger, how about with you? Is there one with you too? Is there a companion that is a devil with you too? And he said, yes. So Muhammad, the seal of all prophets, has a devil that is with him, associated with him at all times. And if I don't bow down or obey the laws of Allah and His Messenger, which is Muhammad, who is controlled by Satan, I get my head cut off. And not only that, but Allah helped me against him, he said, so I am saved from his hand. And here's the kicker, and he does not command me, but for one reason. What is it? But for good. So Satan commands Muhammad to do good, and there are two things that are wrong. Can you show me where that's at in the Quran? And can you show me how Muhammad was ever doing anything good for the sake of humanity? I can't see anywhere in the Quran or in the Hadiths. All right, so we are approaching an hour, and we promised Dr. Bill Warner would be with us for approximately an hour. So Dr. Bill Warner, I'm going to ask you this last question, and then why don't you give us like a final statement to tell us some educated facts about Islam. So if Islam is called the far enemy, as we've heard, they're far enemy, they're not going to hurt us at all. What is the near enemy that is near us here in the West?
This comes from Sun Tzu's Art of War. We have the far enemy, which is Islam, and then we have the near enemy, who are the apologists for Islam. Let me give you an example. I've never been harmed by any Muslim, but I have been harmed by people who support Islam. They've canceled speaking venues for me. For instance, let me give you an example. Facebook no longer post all my videos. I used to get 1,000 new Twitter followers every month. They're down to 50. My book on Sharia law for non-Muslims, we used to be on Amazon, the best-selling book on Islamic law on all of Amazon. That's gone away. So the ones who are actually harming me, the Southern Poverty Law Center and such others, are not Muslims, but people doing Muslims' biddings. I call them the near enemy. I call Islam the far enemy. And it's the near enemy that is dangerous to us. It's the near enemy that changes our textbooks. For instance, the textbooks in the United States are being rewritten in order that they're very favorable to Islam. Muslims are not doing this. The publishers of these textbooks are not Muslims. They're Christians or atheists or Jews or whatever, but they're not Muslim. So therefore, they're doing the bidding of Islam and supporting Islam, but they're not Muslims themselves. And I find them in my life and other people who do what I do to be the truth, is that we're harmed more by those who support Islam and who are politically correct than the actual Muslims themselves.
Okay, so for your last, I'd say 3 minutes, go ahead and tell us about political Islam. And you've already told us the steps that we can take here in America to do something about it. I see myself that a lot of Christians, in the name of tolerance, like I've mentioned earlier, don't want to talk to Muslims about these facts because they don't want to hurt their feelings. I've seen in my culture as well, and according to the hadith that I can show you as well, that if we don't talk back, or if we're not so, the word I would use is if we're not so harsh, they would think of us as weak. And by harshness, I don't mean you go out and bash, but I mean you just go out and you talk to them, stating these facts. Now, I've seen when I go door to door here in Michigan, and I talk to a lot of Muslims. I go door knocking, and I knock on their door, and I use with them the Quran, precisely the Quran. I leave the Bible and Jesus to last. I'm speaking their language. I'm speaking in their tongue. Because as soon as I say the Bible or the Torah, this wall comes up, and this invisible wall, and they block everything that I have to say. So I'm using their language. What is a good strategy that you might think to help us with this, and what is your final point on the political Islam?
Well, you're using the Quran. I find it easier to teach people how to understand Muhammad. Muhammad's easier to understand than Allah. So therefore, I tell people, and by the way, I learned this from a Christian from Iraq, he's an apostate, and he's very successful at converting Muslims. And what he does is he asks them how they like Islamic State and how Islamic State ruled. Then he shows that everything they don't like about Islamic State is taken from Muhammad. So I agree with you 100%, Eddie, and by the way, I never insult, I never call names. You've seen me on this show. This is the way I do business, the way we're doing it here. I'm polite, and I do not ever call people names. I don't say Muhammad was bad or anything. I just say, here's what he did. Now, is this the person you want to be your prophet? Is this the one you want to be your religious leader? Now then, and it works very successfully. The only people I know who are successful at converting Muslims are doing exactly what you do. They start with the Quran, they start with Islam, and then they create a dissatisfaction with it or show it's false, and then you have a better solution, which is, anything's a better solution in my opinion, but you have a better solution definitely with a Christian. So you're doing exactly the right thing, and my purpose in life is to convince more Christians that if they would learn about Muhammad and learn about the Quran, they could convert many more Muslims, because you're doing it exactly correct.
Yeah. You know, what's unfortunate is that I see a lot of Christians here in the West don't even know much about their own Jesus, and that's the unfortunate part. Dr. Bill, where can people find your books? Where can they find you online? Tell us more about that before you go. Give some attention to yourself so that way you can sell some more books.
This is a good thing. I have a website called politicalislam.com. I have a channel on YouTube, Political Islam, and I sell about a dozen books on the subject of Islam. And the thing about my books are they're easy to understand. I have a doctorate in physics, but I don't try to impress you with my intelligence. What I try to show you is this is how easy it is to learn. It's very simple. And so you need to educate yourself, and I would say start with the life of Muhammad, because he was a fascinating person. And if you'll study, once you understand Muhammad, the Quran becomes very easy to understand. So don't start reading the Quran. Instead, start with Muhammad. So I encourage you to go to my website and buy my books, not just for the purpose of furthering my own economic well-being, but the fact is they're easy to understand and they'll let you become very useful. And because everyone needs to be able to deal with the Muslim next door, not in a way that's harsh, not in a way that's insulting, but in a way that's insightful and based on facts.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Bill. We respect you. We thank you for your work. God bless you and your family as well. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. We want to have you on again, if that's okay with you, Dr. Bill. So
fine with me. And by the way, I enjoyed meeting Rami. He knows his business.
Yes, yes, he does, which we're glad. So do you. So we thank you for joining us. Let's go ahead and take a short break, folks, and we'll be right back.
Do we really need a $6 billion wall on our southern border? Do we really need a travel ban on 6 Muslim nations? Why would we exclude anyone from coming to America? Because some of those immigrants are not very nice. 19 Muslim immigrants killed 2,996 Americans September 11, 2001, a day that will live in infamy. Unfortunately, our nation has failed to learn who or what attacked us that day. Well, it's quite simple. It's the religion of Islam. No one likes to say it, but the Trinity channel has been exposing the violent nature of Islam and its threat to the United States of America and Christians worldwide through TV broadcasting over the last decade. And if you call now, we will give you a free DVD exposing the violent underpinnings of Islam, presenting the answer of the gospel in Jesus Christ. ABN and the Trinity channel, a lone voice of truth in a desert wasteland of political correctness.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching once again. We want to remind the callers, the audience, that our phone lines are open. The phone number is 248-416-1300. That's 248-416-1300. If you have any comments, objections, or any questions that you would like to ask. Brother Rami, we're still there, are you? Yep, all right. So, Brother Rami, how can we, in your opinion, stop this political movement, stop political Islam? Will it take violence, persuasion? What can we do in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, we cannot ban or we cannot do any law that bans the Islamic faith. Not because I support banning the Islamic faith, but it's not reasonable to ban the Islamic faith. If we ban the Islamic faith, then next maybe we ban the Christian faith. So I think we can ban each movement associated with political Islam, like the Muslim Brotherhood, like any group which takes the verses of political Islam, like from Quran, like jihadist movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and each other group that funds the terrorist organization, like, for example, CARE. CARE funds Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist group by the U.S. State Department. Even United Arab Emirates banned the Muslim Brotherhood and banned CARE. But while the funny is, United States, Canada, the West in general, Europe, still not banning the Muslim Brotherhood, still not banning these terrorist groups. Western countries like USA should use their influence to affect the decision makers in Muslim countries to reform Islam. And it's the best to remove the jihadi violent scripts from Quran and that which inspires the jihadi terrorists to do terrorist attacks and this will take, of course, time. We have Islam in general consists from Quran and Hadith, Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. We have to ban the scripts. For example, 2 days ago, I read on Facebook, on Twitter, that an Emirati academic said that Sahih Bukhari has nothing to do with Islam. That's a first step to reform Islam. But we need unofficial government stances from these Muslim or Arab countries so they reform Islam. As I said, we cannot ban the Islamic faith, so we have to reform it, to reform the scriptures, to reform anything which inspires violent or hateful. Another way to stop political Islam is spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ to Muslims and promote the freedom of religion in Muslim countries. We have to spread this gospel in the first hand, in second hand, to promote the ideas of freedom of religion, not only converting Muslim to Christianity, for example, converting the Muslim to any other faith or non-faith, but preferably, in my opinion, to Christian, but I'm not forcing anyone to follow whatever they want to follow, just promoting the freedom of religion in Muslim countries. If freedom of religion in Muslim countries promoted, I think we will see a lot of Muslims leaving the Islamic faith to Christianity, to atheism, to whatever faith.
Right, right. Now, you mentioned a lot there, and that's a lot to take in. But if I was living in the East still, and I knew all this knowledge, now we're not saying that if you're watching this and you're from the East, go out and state the facts to everybody and do it with vigor and try your best and hardest to convert. Obviously, the Lord Jesus Christ will convert. But through you, he often uses human agencies to do that. So I would say you'd come with people with understanding as we are doing here. We're stating the facts in a way that's not bashing, that's not hurting their feelings, even though some of their feelings might be hurt. That's not our intention. We want to let that be said right away. That's not our intention. To ban the Sahih Bukharis and the Hadiths and the Quran, what will we ban it as, Rami? Will we say that this is hate speech against humanity because it does teach a lot of things that is against humanity or immoral? Let me just give you an example. We understand Muhammad, and he was very, very white. Coming from that area, he was very white. So he had a white thigh, for an example, that it mentions in Sahih Bukhari 1367. I'm sorry, volume 1, 367. Also, he had a white armpit. It's amazing how much it's describing him in Sahih Bukhari, volume 2, 141. Also, he was a white man in Sahih Bukhari, volume 163, volume 2, 122. Also, he had a rosy color about him, rosy cheeks, sort of, Sahih Bukhari, 4, 747. So we see that he was very, very white, but then what does he have to say about those that were blacks? I mean, you spoke about human rights, and you spoke about Sharia law as well. Surah Al-Imran, that's chapter 3, 106. On that day, some faces will be whitened and some faces will be blackened. And as for those whose faces have been blackened, it will be said unto them, disbelieved you after your belief. The taste of punishment is for you that disbelieved, and these are the ones whose faces have been blackened. Now, some people might take that as a metaphor, but let me give you another one. In chapter 39, verse 60 of the Quran, and on that day of the resurrection, you, Muhammad, will see those who lied, that is lying, concerning Allah, and their faces have been blackened. Is it not the home of the scorners in hell? So those whose face has been blackened have these corners in hell. But we see in chapter, let me just get it correctly so that I can quote it correctly for you guys. We see in chapter, I think I lost it, chapter 38, or we'll go to Al-Tirmidhi. Let me see it. Oh, I just found it. I'm sorry about the delay. Chapter 9, verse 61. The apostle said, whoever wants to see Satan, that is in comparison to Satan, whoever wants to see Satan, let him take a look at Nabtal ibn al-Harith. Okay, who is this guy and what does he look like? He was a sturdy black man. So it's obvious that Muhammad compared Shaitan, Satan, to a sturdy black man. And it's obvious that he was somewhat of a racist against blacks. He had long flowing hair, inflamed eyes, and dark ruddy cheeks. So Muhammad was, not only that, I'll mention some hadiths as well. He was against black people. He was against women, as you have mentioned earlier. He considered women to be half of worth of a man. Read chapter 2, verse 282 of the Quran. It's a long verse, but right in the middle, it's about a contract, and it'll tell you that same thing. Or the Sharia law. The Sharia law that we talked about before also tells us some things that are really not human rights at all, have nothing to do with human rights. But as a matter of fact, in my opinion, they go against that. Let's talk about that a little bit, Rami. We've lived under Sharia law. Sharia law is part of the political movement of Islam. What can you tell us about Sharia law that will help us understand this political movement of Islam so that way we may find some facts to speak against it in the public?
Sharia law is a totalitarian movement. Again, Islam is not compatible with democracy, with freedom of speech. So it's because it's based on Sharia law, because it's based on jihadi scriptures, which claims jihad terrorism. Sharia law is a disgrace to humanity. It's not about a faith, a single faith, a religious movement. It's about the politics, which inspires the jihadis to cut off hands, for stoning women and killing people. So I think Islam is a crime against humanity because of the Sharia law, not because of the basic faith of Islam, because of the Sharia law. People like me, as I said, and people, the unbelievers in general, should be fought by the Muslims. So I think it's a crime against humanity. That's it.
I think it is a crime against humanity, particularly if Sharia law is kicking in the actual things that Muhammad had done. For an example, marrying a girl of 6 years of age and then consummating the marriage at 9 years of age. So at 9 years old, Muhammad could marry any person at 6, have sex with them at age 9. Women are worth half the opinion of that of a man. If a woman gets raped, she needs to present witnesses in court to present her case against the man. She cannot present the case by herself. I mean, who's going to be there watching while this woman is being raped and not doing anything about it? And then they have to come to court and say something about it. And if they do go to court, the reason that the women that is, would get killed or beheaded is because they might have showed too much skin. And that's the reason why they weren't wearing the hijab all the way around. There's this one story in particular that I mentioned last time. A girl's clitoris should be cut off under Sharia law per Muhammad's words, per Muhammad's commands. This is in Kitab al-Adab. Kitab al-Adab, the book of, we would say, morals or integrity or the ways that you would behave, etiquette, I would use that word. That's Kitab al-Adab, that's Hadith 5251, where a girl has to be circumcised, just like a man has to be circumcised. Brother Rami just mentioned that a woman can get beat under Sharia law, and this is the political move as well. This is mentioned in chapter 4, verse 3 of the Quran. So there are a bunch of things that we can talk about, but one of my favorites, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but the homosexual under Sharia law also is punished in a very, very severe way, and this is the political move of Islam that we have to follow if we were living under an Islamic country. In the Quran, chapter 4, verse 15, for those who are lesbian amongst your women, bring 4 witnesses against them to testify against them, all right, and then jail them in their houses till they die. So that's the punishment for homosexual women, for lesbians, all right. The punishment for homosexual men, for gays, is not the same at all. In chapter 4, verse 16, which is right the next verse, If two men among you are guilty of homosexuality, punish them both. And if they both repent, leave them alone. So now, even in this political move, even in this under Sharia law, the homosexual men have a chance to repent, but not the women. So talk about human rights. Even if in human rights, the women don't have a right at all. They are beat till their skin is greener than their shirts, according to what Aisha had said. And the funny part is, that I had mentioned before as well, the punishment according to Ibn Abbas, the interpretation of Ibn Abbas in chapter 4, verse 16, it says that punish them both with insults and beatings and with sandals. You're supposed to hit them with sandals. Rami, I mentioned this before. I believe both of our mothers used to hit us with sandals a lot, especially when we were kids. But is this really the way we ought to go? Is this really the way that we're supposed to act under Sharia law? I mean, what do we do with this nonsense? How do we even continue to go against it?
When you mention Islam, the Sharia law, when you mention also the Jannah or the heaven or the hell in the Islam, you see the imagination of a simple man, a Bedouin man from the Saudi, from the Arabian Peninsula. You see how Islam is primitive. It just shows the imagination of a simple, primitive man. He was a smart, sick in the head, inspired by Satan, a warmonger. That's the fact. I'm not calling names. Just I'm telling the history. Just an imagination of a simple, primitive man who was sick in his head, wanted to convert all the world, or the Arabic Peninsula and all the world to his faith. Islam is not compatible with democracy. Islam is not compatible with human rights. Islam is not compatible with animal rights. Islam is not compatible with women's rights. Islam is not compatible also with whatever rights. Only Islam is superior to non-Muslims. Slavery still exists in Muslim countries. In Saudi Arabia until now, slavery still exists in Libya now. Slavery to blacks, and that's done by the Islamic law, the Sharia law.
Yeah, until this day, slavery is still being practiced all over the East. The UN had to step in just recently and say, hey, you cannot practice that anymore. And I believe Saudi was the one who supposedly banished, but we still don't know about that. Now, lastly, I want to mention this. Sharia law is a political move or a move under the political Islam. Therefore, we ought to follow it if we were living under Sharia law. Imagine this. If you found a disbeliever on the street, this is what Muhammad told his followers to do and what God told Muhammad to do, and this is what we ought to follow. In chapter 69, verses 30 through 33, which I mentioned this before as well, but I'd like to mention it again because I believe not a lot of people know about it. Chapter 69, verses 30 through 33. You'll find this in Muhammad Bikhtal and Yusuf Ali's translations. You won't find it in any other translations except for these two. It says, seize him and tie him and burn him with blazing fire. Insert in him a chain, whereof the length is 70 cubits. Why? Because he does not believe in Allah the Most High. Insert in him a chain that's 70 cubits long. Insert it where? Let your imagination run wild. But let me read to you the interpretation before it runs too far. The interpretation of one of the best scholars in Islam, Tanwir al-Muqbas min Tafsir ibn Abbas. Tafsir ibn Abbas. That's the Prophet's cousin, Abdullah ibn Abbas, right? He says, who's closer than the Prophet's cousin? The Prophet's cousin. He says, insert in him, that is the chain in his anus. So the chain goes where? In the buttocks, in the anus. And extract it from his mouth. So take the chain in his anus and take it all the way out from his mouth. And whatever remains of the chain, whatever's left of the chain, tie it around his neck till he eventually chokes to death. And that's what we ought to do if we were living under Sharia law. And Rami said this was a human rights. No, Islam has nothing to do with human rights. And particularly in this way, why not just kill him and let him be? Why insert in his anus a chain and then take it out of his mouth, and then whatever's left over, tie it around his neck? There's a movie here called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Go watch it. You might see some of the things that are happening, particularly here with the hadiths and the Quran and the tafsirs that I just read. I mean, it's almost like the same. I'm watching a horror movie, yet I'm calling it a religion, but in the guise of what? It's a political move disguised as a religion. That's all that means. Now, Rami, we're coming to an end of the show. Why don't you go ahead and give us your final statements? And one thing that we often don't do and we forget is that we don't mention Jesus much. So let's give a message about Jesus. Does Jesus have a law that we ought to follow? Is it anything like Sharia law? Is Christianity a political move? Some might say it is.
The difference between Islam and Christianity, one single. Islam is a hate. Christianity is a love. Muhammad was a warmonger. Jesus was a peacemaker. That's a little bit difference. Muhammad has had no morals, while Jesus taught us the morals, basic constitutions of the modern world. These human rights, each single good in the modern world, in the Western world, built on the Jesus teachings. While what funny, Muslims claim that's the real Islam. Muslims, once I sat with some group of people, said Western country do the same Islam, but they are not Muslims. I told them no, they are Christians. Maybe they are atheists, maybe they are secular, but the basic constitution of the world, of the modern world, of the Western world, built over Jesus' teachings. Basically, Jesus is love, Muhammad is hate. Jesus is peacemaker, while Muhammad was a warmonger. Muhammad had the lust for the women, married 13 women and raped more than 80 women, while Jesus was a saint, was the son of God, or the God in the flesh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for those differences. Yeah, we see that a lot. Now, lastly, a lot of Muslims, when I mention these things that are so harsh, they'll mention to us, Joshua. They'll mention to us Moses. They'll mention to us some of the wars during that time. And I'm always answering them like this. Look, there was no laws of the land established during the time of Joshua. There was no morality established. It was just on the rise. That when God gave us the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament, then they started to do away with these things. But even when they mention, like, go out and kill all the Canaanites, their men, women, and children, and cattle, and burn their houses down, I hear that a lot from Muslims, but this is an emphasis. What does that mean? That means if I was a football coach and I'm telling my team, go out and slaughter the other team, do I literally mean slaughter? Go out there with swords and smite at their necks. Do I literally mean that? No. We find that this is in Joshua 1, where a lot of Muslims will mention. But the next book, right after, the next book in the same chapter, we'll see the Canaanites that are still alive. We see the Canaanites that are alive in the book of Esther. We see the Canaanites alive all over. So there are examples of this all over the Old Testament. Now, if you go to Numbers chapter 16, for an example, it says for this particular person that was going against Moses, it says, for him and his whole household were all out there. The ground opened up, and then it just buried them inside while they were still alive. Wow, that seems harsh that Moses would do such a thing under Allah's rule. But if we go to Numbers chapter 26, we'll see that person's family is still alive. So again, this was something called hyperbole in the Bible. It's a hyperbolic language. It's an emphasis on the way you ought to deal with those that are coming against you in war. Because some of the women they kept. And they kept as not as slaves, but they married them, as opposed to the Quran. The Quran has no word for it in Arabic for marriage. It only has the word ankihu, fa'ankihu, or nukah, which means literally to have sex, or literally the F word. That's what it has in the Quran, but not in the Bible. And also in the Bible, since a lot of Muslims want to mention this over and over again, some of the Egyptians, when Moses was being delivered, some of the Egyptian women also came, the midwives also came with Moses and his people and decided to become with his religion and serving his God, which is Jehovah. And they had equal rights. They weren't paid the jizya, they weren't paid extra tax, they weren't subdued to the nearest part of the road if they were walking somewhere. They weren't wearing a belt. This is an Islamic invention. The belt was an Islamic invention for those that were Christians. And so is the Jewish star for the Jews. That was an Islamic invention popularized by Nazi. So they weren't doing any of that in the time of Moses, in the time of Joshua. So Muslims, why don't you, if you're quoting Joshua and Moses, why don't you look at the way that he lived? Why don't you look at the way that these people came that were infidels, obviously in their day, how they were treated? They weren't treated in the same way that your prophet has treated those infidels or those slaves that came to him. They weren't paying the extra tax. They weren't beheaded at the neck, or else they convert and then they can live. So nothing like that took place. So, Brother Rami, we thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, we'll have you on a future episode if you are willing. We thank you for your knowledge that you brought as well. Is there anything you'd like to say before we let you go?
Thank you for hosting me. And I would say Islam is Islam. There is no modern Islam. It's an ideology. It's a cult. I don't have a problem with the Muslims. I have a problem with the Islam. That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to a close. I'd like to say that all of this is possible by your support, by your views, by you sharing and liking this. And I'd also like to say that the Quran is a book that is full of stories that are never, ever from beginning to an end, except for one, that is the story of Joseph and what his brothers had done to him. All the time we'll find stories that are either in the beginning, in the last, or right in the middle. That's not the case with the Bible. And with the Bible, you have the full stories so that you can get a full understanding of what took place. We see in the Quran that has been plagiarized from a lot of Gnostic Gospels, a lot from the Bible, a lot from the New Testament, the Old Testament, from the Torah. It's been plagiarized and copied because Muhammad was kind of like a chameleon, in my opinion. He would change his color to match with the background in order to appease the people that he was with. So my advice to you is, the Quran is telling you in chapter 546, 547, 568, chapter 10, verse 94, that the Bible and the Torah is the Word of God. And it's also saying in chapter 18, verse 27, that no man can alter the Word of God. No one can alter the Word of God. If the Quran is calling our Bible, our Torah, the Word of God, it is your obligation, it is your duty as a Muslim to go and read our Bible. My recommendation, start with the Gospel of John. Read another book, the book of Romans. You'll see that they are some of the most beautiful books, and they teach you something about love that you've never heard of in the Islamic religion, because God, in the Islamic religion, in the Quran and the Hadith, hates the non-believers, the infidels. But not our God. Our God, who is Jesus Christ, who is Jehovah, loves the infidels. He loves those that don't believe in Him. He specializes in chasing after those people. And when you come to a turning point where you're hurting and you're all by yourself, God has created this hole that's in your heart that's like a vacuum, God-shaped vacuum. He's calling you out to Him day and night, telling you, please, follow me, listen to me, for in me you will have eternal life. He's not commanding you. He is begging and pleading with you, telling you that, please follow me, for in me you will find full satisfaction. You're trying to find full satisfaction somewhere else, you will never find it. In Jesus Christ, He is the only way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father. And where's the Father? He's in heaven. No one comes to the Father but by me. This is Jesus' claims over and over again. So this is my claim as a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ and as His friend. Please accept Him into your heart as soon as you can. Believe in Him. Make Him Lord of your life. He will love you, and you will experience real love, a fatherly love that you've never experienced before, because I've experienced it myself. So I'd want you to feel that same feeling that I was feeling, and I want you to experience the same thing, and I want you to be 100% sure that when you die, you will be in the arms of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. You will be in His bosom, and He will love you forever, and He will be your God. And this is my hope for you, to anyone that is watching, that Jesus Christ is love. He offered you His own self. He's sinless, His own self, to die on the cross for you and for me, for my sin and your sin. But if you decide to reject, and you pat yourself on the back and you say, I'm okay, I want nothing to do with you, Jesus, I can enter heaven by myself, you would be in the wrong. Even Muhammad didn't know whether he would go to heaven or to hell. But for us as Christians, we are assured 100% that Jesus is Lord, and because of Him, we will enter heaven. Thank you for watching. We appreciate you. We appreciate your comments, your calls, your suggestions. Please share, like us on Facebook, and take it all over. Spread the word of the Lord. Thank you so much. Have a good night.